the Linguaverse episode 10, The Evolution of English, Arc 2, The Future and Philosophy of Language. Welcome back to the Linguaverse. If you've been listening since the beginning, you'll know this isn't a podcast that rushes to conclusions. We don't take shortcuts or rely on sound bites. We sit with the long story, the layers beneath the obvious, the roots that twist into both soil and sky. Language deserves that patience, because every word you speak today carries not just sound but centuries of history, philosophy, and flesh. In Arc 1, The Roots of Language and the Birth of the Spell, we asked fundamental questions. What is language? How does the tongue shape air into meaning? How do mirror neurons help us learn speech through mimicry? What happens when words wound, when taboo and transgression mark the edges of the speakable? How do semantics and pragmatics, dictionary meaning and contextual force, combine to make living speech? And how, in the end, can we reclaim the tongue from systems that try to colonize it? Arc 1 was about origins, biological, cultural, and spiritual. Arc 2 is about futures. In Episode 9, AI and Synthetic Speech, we crossed into unsettling terrain. We asked, what happens when words are generated without breath? When a machine voice, cloned or predicted, speaks into our ears without ever belonging to a body? Does such a word carry the same weight? Or is it simulation without being? We explored my own process of working with AI, the very tool I use to expand, conceptualize, and research this series, and the tension between its empowering potential and the skepticism I carry about its future risks. Now, Episode 10 turns the focus onto a different question, one that straddles past and present. The evolution of English. Why English? Because English is the language we are speaking here, the medium of this very exploration. It is also, whether we like it or not, the most influential language of our age. It dominates trade, science, technology, diplomacy, academia, and popular culture. It saturates the internet, shapes global slang, and often crowds out local tongues. Yet its power is not built on purity or stability. English is not a fortress, it is a sponge. It has survived by absorbing, stealing, borrowing, and adapting. As David Crystal, perhaps the most famous chronicler of English, puts it, English has become global not because it is superior in structure or simplicity, it is neither, but because it has always been willing to change. It has never said no. This is why I often describe English as a patchwork tongue. It is a language stitched together from invasions, conquests, trades, revolutions, and encounters. It is part Germanic, part Norse, part French, part Latin, sprinkled with borrowings from Arabic, Hindi, Nahuatl, Japanese, Swahili, Yoruba, Maori, and hundreds more. Everyday words in your mouth right now carry hidden passports. Coffee, Arabic kawa, chocolate, Nahuatl zokolotl. Shampoo, Hindi champo. Safari, Swahili safiri. Robot, Czech robota. Kindergarten, German. Banana, Wolof algebra, Arabic. We think we're speaking English, but really we're speaking varying languages of the world. This raises deep questions. If a language is defined by what it borrows, does it ever have a core? Does English have an essence? Or is its identity simply its openness to change? If it thrives by adaptability, what happens when the accelerant of digital culture and AI speeds up its mutation beyond recognition? These are not abstract questions for me. Growing up in an Anglo-Italian family, I saw code switching every day. My relatives would slip between English and Italian mid-sentence. At first I found it amusing, almost chaotic. Later I realized it was something more profound, a demonstration that language is not fixed but fluid, a dance of adaptation in real time. At school, I don't recall being taught much English grammar at all. My written English confidence was low. Strangely, when I began to study Italian seriously in my teens, I learned more about English grammar through Italian than I ever had in English class. Italian forced me to see the skeleton of language, the cases, the conjugations, the structures. It gave me a framework, and from that framework I saw English anew. Then came the internet. In my late teens, I watched written English mutate in front of me. Acronyms like ASL, age, sex, location, became currency in chat rooms. That was before OL, laugh out loud, spread into common use. Written English is shortened, fractured, and sped up. It adapted to screens, to immediacy, to anonymity. It was alive, mutating at the pace of technology. Later in Sweden, I sat in a dentist's chair and stumbled into Svenglish, the hybrid tongue that emerges when Swedes and English speakers patch together missing words with whatever comes to hand. The dentist joked about not being fluent, but their English was excellent until a missing word slipped through, which was filled in by Swedish. I did the same in reverse, and we understood one another perfectly. Even in Germany, when neither English nor German bridged a gap, I spoke Italian spontaneously and was understood. That moment showed me the real energy of language. A shift, a willingness, a spark of recognition across tongues. All of these experiences shaped my fascination with language's adaptability, and they mirror the story of English itself, always hybrid, always flexible, always mutating in the moment. So in this episode, we will trace English's evolution as a patchwork tongue. We'll begin with its Germanic roots in Old English, see how it was reshaped by Norse invasions, transformed by the Norman conquest, flowered into Middle and Early Modern English through Chaucer, Shakespeare, and the printing press, and expanded globally through empire and trade. We'll ask what makes English English. Theft, adaptability, creativity? We'll explore its identity not as a cathedral of purity, but as a noisy marketplace, a bazaar of words. And I'll return again and again to the lived echoes of this history in my own story, in the code switching of my family, the hybrid slang of the internet, and the global patchwork of English today. Because the story of English is not just academic. It is personal, it is political, it is philosophical, and it is still being written. The patchwork tongue. The story of English begins not in stability, but in fracture. Old English, roots in migration. When the Romans withdrew from Britain around 410 AD, the linguistic landscape of the island was Celtic. Brittonic languages shaped place names, rhythms, and sounds. Then waves of Germanic tribes crossed the North Sea, Angles, Saxons, Jutes. They brought dialects that would fuse into Old English. Old English was heavily inflected, like modern German. It had grammatical cases, gendered nouns, and complex verb conjugations. A line from Beowulf reads, Wat, we gardina in Girdegum, Liotseninga, rem Jeffrenon, roughly lo. We have heard of the glory of the Spear Danes in days of old, of the kings of the people. Even here we see words that feel half familiar, Seninga, kings Girdegum, days of yore. But it is not modern English. It is a cousin, recognizable yet alien. Norse invasions. The gift of simplicity. In the 8th and 9th centuries, Vikings raided and settled. Old Norse met Old English. The result was profound. Norse simplified English grammar, eroding inflections. More than this, Norse gave us everyday words. Egg, sky, window, skin, leg, law, take, they, them, there. The importance of pronouns cannot be overstated. Without Norse, we would not have they. Imagine how differently our worldviews might sound. English learned from Norse pragmatism. It dropped endings, simplified verbs, and became more analytic. It became easier to learn, more adaptable, more open. The Norman Conquest, French dominance 1066, the Battle of Hastings, William the Conqueror. English peasants lost their tongue of power. For centuries, the French dominated the court, law, and literature. But English survived underground. Slowly it absorbed. From the French we gained justice, honour, government, prison, beef, pork, and mutton. Notice the doublets: cow, Anglo-Saxon versus beef, French bouffe, pig versus pork, sheep versus mutton. Animals are named in English, but their meat is named in French, a reminder of class divisions, who farmed and who feasted. By Chaucer's time in the 14th century, English had become Middle English, recognisable but layered. The great vowel shift, 15th, 16th centuries, transformed pronunciation, pulling vowels upward in the mouth. Spelling lagged, creating the bizarre inconsistencies we still live with today. Early modern English, printing, Shakespeare, Bible with Caxton's printing press, 1476. Spelling was standardized. With the Renaissance, Latin and Greek poured in, encyclopedia, atmosphere, democracy. Shakespeare stretched the language beyond measure. He coined or popularized over 1,700 words: assassination, radiance, lonely, majestic. His plays reveled in English's hybrid vigor. The King James Bible, 1611, gave English a sonorous rhythm. Let there be light. Its cadences shaped prose for centuries. Empire and borrowings. As Britain expanded, English absorbed globally. Bungalow, veranda. Hindi, tomato, chocolate, nahuatl, algebra, zero, Arabic. Atu, Polynesian, kangaroo, gugu yimither. English grew not by purity but by contact. Personal integration. Code switching as mirror, I grew up seeing this patchwork enacted in my own home. Anglo-Italian relatives slipping between tongues. A phrase beginning in English, ending in Italian. At first I laughed. Later I realized this was England's story written in my family. Flexibility, hybridity, adaptability. An Italian study taught me English grammar indirectly. The silence of listening taught me patience, like a child learning speech by immersion. In Sweden, Svenglish made me laugh, but also showed me how languages merge pragmatically. In Germany, at an Italian restaurant, the Italian language bridged a gap when English and German failed. These are not anomalies. They are the lived pattern of English. When in doubt, adapt. When pressed, absorb. Reflection prompt, take a breath. Look at the words in your last text message. How many were borrowed? Emoji, Japanese. Ketchup, Hokkien Chinese. Alcohol, Arabic. We walk through a museum of global history every time we speak. English is not one voice, it is a chorus. Philosophical reflection, theft, adaptability, creativity. So what is English? Lingual theft? Our lingual sharing and borrowing? Our survivor? Or a creator, perhaps all five? English thrives in a mess. It doesn't fear contradiction. It is promiscuous. It is not a cathedral, but a bazaar. And that may be why it dominates, because it mirrors our chaotic, globalized age better than any tidy tongue could. Reflection prompt. Which borrowed words do you use daily without knowing their origin? What hidden histories live in your speech? Activity. Word passport aim. Feel the patchwork history of English in your mouth. Time 10-15 minutes 1. Pick 3 everyday words you use, e.g. table, school, garden. 2. Look up each word's origin. Old English, Norse, French, Latin, elsewhere. 3. Say each word out loud twice, first as just English, then while naming its origin, e.g., garden, from Old Northern French. 4. Note one sentence about how this changes your sense of the word. The global tongue. If the first part of this presentation was about how English grew up at home, absorbing Norse, French, Latin, and countless borrowings, this part is about what happened when it left home. Because English didn't stay confined to the shores of Britain. It travelled, and with that travel, it changed forever. This is the story of how English became global, but not global in the sense of one uniform speech, global in the sense of endless variation, a single name for thousands of tongues, accents, registers, dialects, and hybrids. English today is not a monolith but a galaxy. Empire, trade, and expansion. The first phase of English's global spread was tied to the empire. From the 16th century onwards, Britain established colonies and trade routes across the world. With ships came merchants, missionaries, administrators, and soldiers, and with them, English. But an empire is never one way. English imposed itself, but it also absorbed. In India, words like bungalow, pajamas, and shampoo entered English. In the Caribbean, African, indigenous, and European tongues collided, creating creoles that carried English grammar with local rhythms. In North America, native words like tomato, tobacco, moccasin, and raccoon filtered into English. In Oceania, Maori and Aboriginal words reshaped vocabulary. Kangaroo, boomerang, kiwi. Trade reinforced this expansion. The East India Company spread English alongside commerce. Later, the Industrial Revolution and global trade networks cemented its use in science, engineering, and industry. So by the 19th century, English was not just the language of Britain. It was the language of empire imposed, resisted, absorbed, and transformed. The American century, the second phase of English's global dominance, came not from Britain, but from the United States. The 20th century was the American century. Hollywood, jazz, rock and roll, television, and the internet. American English became the global export. Words shifted again. From the US came slang, cultural terms, and technological coinages. Cool movie, okay, skyscraper, teenager software. The internet, largely American in its early development, coded itself in English. ASCII, HTML, and the first social networks all carried English at their core. Suddenly, English wasn't just the language of empire or trade. It was the default code of the digital world. World Englishes. But to call this one language is misleading. Linguists like Braj Kakru describe English today as three concentric circles. The inner circle, native English-speaking countries, UK, US, Canada, Australia. The outer circle, places where English is an official or second language, India, Nigeria, Singapore. The expanding circle, places where English is learned as a foreign language, China, Russia, Brazil. Each circle produces its own Englishes. Nigerian English has its own idioms and rhythms. Indian English mixes Hindi and English into Hinglish. Singapore has Singlish. In Europe, Euro-English is emerging in EU institutions, clipped, pragmatic, with its own vocabulary. There is no single global English. There are Englishes, plural, vibrant, localized. Hybrid tongues. The Svenglish dentist, I saw this myself in the dentist chair in Sweden. I was there for an emergency appointment, and the dentist began in English. Their fluency was excellent, but here and there a word slipped, replaced by Swedish. I did the same in reverse, throwing in fragments of Swedish I had studied. The result was Svenglish, a hybrid tongue, a bridge built on improvisation. It wasn't textbook English, nor textbook Swedish, but it worked. Meaning carried across. What struck me most was not just the efficiency, but the warmth. The hybrid tongue created a moment of connection, a shared vulnerability. Neither of us was speaking perfectly. Both of us were patching, but that patchwork was enough. This is how English works globally, not as a rigid code, but as a toolkit, a resource people bend to their needs. Sometimes clumsy, sometimes elegant, but always adaptive. Pidgins and Creoles globally, English has also fused into entirely new tongues, Pidgins and Creoles. A pidgin emerges when speakers of different languages need to communicate for trade or survival. It is simplified, reduced in grammar, but functional. A Creole emerges when that pidgin becomes native to a community, when children grow up speaking it as their first language. Creoles expand, develop complexity, and become full languages in their own right. Jamaican patois, Tok Pisin in Papua New Guinea, Creole in Sierra Leone, these are not bad English. They are living, breathing languages born of English contact. Again, English doesn't remain intact. It mutates, fuses, and spawns new offspring. Lingua franca versus colonizer, this raises a tension. Is English a bridge or a colonizer? On the one hand, English as a lingua franca allows communication across borders. Scientists can collaborate globally because English is the default medium. Diplomats negotiate in English. Travelers patch conversations in English. On the other hand, English dominance marginalizes other tongues. Local languages can be eroded, silenced, and devalued. English as a global language can look like linguistic imperialism, the continuation of colonial logics through words rather than armies. I've felt both sides. In Germany, Italian unexpectedly became my bridge. In Sweden, Svenglish was connected. But I've also seen how English creates hierarchies, who can participate fluently and who is excluded, who sounds authoritative and who is marked as broken. This is the paradox of global English, liberating an oppressive bridge and barrier all at once. Digital acceleration. The digital era has amplified this. On the one hand, the internet spreads English globally, memes, acronyms, and hashtags. On the other hand, it fragments English into micro-dialects, gamer slang, fandom language, Twitter English, tech speak. I remember the early days of chat rooms, ASL, BRB. That was a new dialect of English born in digital space. Today, it's emojis, TikTok captions, and hybridized slang mixing English with whatever language users speak locally. English online is not one English, but thousands. It is endlessly recombined, shortened, and memed. Philosophical pause. What is English now? So what is English now? Is it a global tongue, or 1,000 tongues under one name? David Crystal argues that English is unique precisely because it tolerates variation. No academy dictates what is correct. Dictionaries record usage. They don't prescribe it. If enough people start saying something, it becomes English. That openness is a strength, but it also raises anxiety. Some fear English is fragmenting beyond recognition. Will British, American, Indian, Nigerian, and Singaporean English still be mutually intelligible in 100 years? Or are they drifting into separate languages, just as Latin fractured into French, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese? My own sense is this. English will survive as a name, but beneath it will be countless Englishes. The centre will not hold, because the centre was never fixed. Personal reflection, silence, confidence, and hybridity. During a period of my life, people would say, "You don't say much in Italian," because my vocabulary was limited. I stayed silent not out of disinterest, but out of learning. I was absorbing, building, waiting. Eventually, fluency came, and with it joy. Nights spent speaking with cousins in flowing Italian showed me the payoff of patience. With Swedish, I feel a similar silence. I know grammar and vocabulary, but I hesitate to speak aloud. The vowels feel foreign on my tongue. There's self-consciousness, fear of mistakes, and fear of ridicule. Some correct generously, others belittle. This silence mirrors the global English learner's experience. Confidence is not just grammar, it is social permission. To speak is to risk, and yet every hybrid attempt builds a bridge. My Svenglish moment with the dentist was not perfect, but it was real. It showed me again that language is not about flawless grammar, but about connection. Reflection prompt. Think of the last time you spoke to someone whose first language was not your own. Did you notice their errors? Or did you notice their effort? Did you focus on form or on meaning? English today is not about correctness. It is about creativity, about reaching across difference. Every hybrid word is an act of courage, the double-edged sword of global English. So, is English's global spread a gift or a loss? Both. It gives us communication on a scale never seen before, but it also flattens nuance, erodes diversity, and creates hierarchies. The challenge is to hold both truths, to use English as a bridge without letting it become a bulldozer, to celebrate hybridity without erasing local difference, to remember that the patchwork tongue is strongest when it recognizes every patch. English has become global by refusing to stay still. It changes with every mouth it passes through, every land it touches. It thrives by hybridity, by patchwork, by courage in imperfection. When I sat in that Swedish dentist's chair, I wasn't speaking textbook English or textbook Swedish. I was speaking something in between. And in that in-between, understanding bloomed. That is the story of English now. Not one tongue, but many. Not a single melody, but a polyphony. A global chorus, messy, fractured, but alive. The digital mutation. If the previous part showed us how English fractured and spread across the globe, this part turns to a newer transformation, the digital mutation. Because the internet didn't just carry English outward, it changed English from the inside. The internet as a linguistic laboratory, every new medium reshapes language. The printing press froze spelling into relative stability. Radio and television flattened accents into broadcast English. But the internet has done something stranger. It has created a laboratory where words mutate in real time, globally visible, instantly shared. I grew up watching this unfold. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, as chat rooms and instant messaging spread, I saw English compress and reshape itself before my eyes. ASL? Age, sex, location. The first shorthand I learned was in an online space. BRB, be right back, a laugh out loud. What fascinated me wasn't just the brevity, but the culture. We were inventing a new register of English, one that was fast, clipped, and designed for speed rather than elegance. It was efficient, but also playful. This wasn't a minor trend. It was the birth of digital English, a language designed not for books or speeches, but for screens, for keyboards, for immediacy. LOL. From laughter to grammar take LOL. Originally, it meant laughing out loud, literal. If something made you laugh, you typed it. But quickly, its use shifted. People began using LOL not to mark actual laughter, but to soften tone. A message like that was awkward lol, doesn't mean you laughed. It means you're diffusing tension, signaling friendliness, cushioning your words. In other words, LOL became a particle of digital pragmatics, a marker of tone, not meaning, a tiny signal of emotion embedded in text. This is grammar, it's not decoration. It's function, and LOL is not alone. LMAO, laughing my ass off, ROFL, rolling on the floor laughing, XD, ha ha hey, each carries its own shade of tone. We've created an entire tonal system within digital English, compensating for the absence of voice and face. Memes as language, then came memes. Memes are often treated as jokes, but linguistically, they are compressed cultural texts. A meme is not just an image plus a caption. It is a reference, an allusion, a piece of shared context. Think of the distracted boyfriend meme. The image of a man looking away from his partner to another woman. The template is endlessly reused. Label each figure differently, and suddenly the image becomes a sentence, an argument, a story. Memes are grammar. They are templates for meaning. They mutate like verbs. They allow infinite recombination, each iteration carrying both the original image and the new joke layered onto it. In this way, memes are the closest thing we have to hieroglyphs of the digital age, pictures carrying layers of linguistic play. Hashtags as connective tissue, another mutation, the hashtag. At first it was simply a way to tag content, Sue Holiday music, but hashtags evolved into something else, performative speech acts. When someone posts Me Too is not a label. It is a declaration, a solidarity move, a political statement. Hashtags collapse description and action into one. This is pragmatics at scale, language not just naming but doing. Hashtags are a form of collective incantation, gathering thousands of voices into one spell. Emojis, a return to pictographs and then emojis. Emojis are often dismissed as childish, but linguistically, they are profound. They are the return of pictography into mainstream writing. A smiley face, a heart, a fire symbol, each functions like an ideogram, carrying emotional weight. But more than that, emojis have become syntax. Consider I'm fine emoji smiling face up versus I'm fine emoji smiling face upside down versus I'm fine emoji heavy tears crying. The words are identical, but the meaning is entirely different. The emoji doesn't decorate, it transforms. In fact, emojis work like intonation in speech. They add prosody to flat text. They are the melody line of digital English. And like all languages, emojis mutate. The peach and eggplant emojis took on sexual connotations. The skull emoji shifted from death to I'm dead, as in uncontrollable laughter. These changes happen socially, collectively, with dizzying speed. Abbreviation and compression digital English also compresses. Words become acronyms, acronyms become words. Oh my god, yo, you only once FOMO, fear of to chiar. Too long, didn't read. Some of these migrate back into speech. People now say OMG aloud, not just write it. The boundary between text and speech blurs. This mirrors earlier historical compressions. Just as Old English inflections were eroded under Norse influence, modern English words are eroded under digital pressure. Efficiency drives mutation. The culture of tone, one striking feature of digital English is its obsession with tone. Without vocal inflection, writers invent new tools to signal emotion. Capitalization equals shouting, lowercase equals casual, ironic, understated. Punctuation equals formality or aggression. No punctuation equals friendliness or haste. I'm fine feels cold final, I'm fine feels neutral. I'm fine feels casual, maybe tired. I'm fine lol feels soft, self-effacing. These micro shifts are the pragmatics of digital English. They are as real as grammar. Personal reflection. Growing with the mutation I lived through this transition. As a teenager, I remember entering chat rooms where ASL was the opener, where you wrote in acronyms to keep pace, where tone had to be invented because voice was absent. At first it felt clumsy, but soon it became natural. Online I wasn't writing essays. I was writing bursts of code, compressed signals carrying maximum meaning with minimal letters. And then gradually, I saw these forms leak back into speech. Friends saying LOL aloud, adults use BRB in conversation. The membrane between written and spoken broke down. English had mutated, and I was living inside the mutation. Philosophical pause. Mutation or degradation? Of course, not everyone sees this as positive. Some argue that digital English degrades language, erodes spelling, and destroys grammar. They lament the loss of proper English in favor of acronyms and emojis. But this argument misunderstands history. English has always mutated. Spelling was never fixed until the printing press. Slang has always unsettled the old guard. New registers have always emerged with new technologies. Think of how the telegraph birthed its own abbreviated English. So is digital English a degradation? Or is it simply the next step in a long evolution? I lean toward the latter. Mutation is not decay. It is vitality. A language that doesn't change is a dead language. The acceleration of change, what is different now is speed. Old English shifted slowly over centuries. Middle English took hundreds of years to evolve into early modern English. But digital English mutates in months. Memes rise and die within weeks. Hashtag meanings shift overnight. Emojis acquire new connotations daily. This acceleration is unprecedented. It creates instability, yes, but also creativity. English is mutating not once per century, but once per season. Reflection prompt. Think about your own digital writing. When was the last time you used LOL? Did you mean laughter or tone softening? When was the last time you used an emoji to shift meaning? Do you abbreviate, punctuate, and capitalize differently online than you do in a letter or essay? Part 2. Activity. My English is aim. Notice how your English shifts across people and places. Time. 1 day like logging 1. Keep a mini log of 5 short interactions, voice or text, with different people, friend, colleague, family, stranger, service staff. 2. For each jot, who you spoke to, one phrase you actually used, how your tone lexicon changed, more formal. More slang? Mixed with another language? 3. Circle the interaction that felt most you. Why that one? Try a micro switch in tomorrow's similar interaction. Borrow one phrase or rhythm from the most you version and notice the result. You are already part of the mutation. Digital English as a new dialect. We can think of digital English as its own dialect, with rules, conventions, and pragmatics. It's not uniform, but it is coherent. It has markers of belonging. To write without emojis, without abbreviations, without tone markers, is to risk sounding formal, robotic, out of touch. To overuse them is to risk sounding juvenile. The balance is delicate, but the grammar is real. This dialect will not stay confined to screens. It is bleeding into speech, literature, and advertising. Already, novels include text message dialogues. Scripts include emoji references. English as a whole is absorbing its digital child. English has always been a patchwork tongue, but the internet has accelerated its mutation into overdrive. From LOL as a tone marker to emojis as prosody, from hashtags as collective spells to memes as living hieroglyphs, digital English is not destroying the language. It is expanding it. Yes, it feels chaotic. Yes, it mutates too fast for some. But this is English being itself, adaptive, flexible, promiscuous. The digital age has simply turned up the speed. So the question is not whether English will survive. It is how we will navigate its mutations, whether we resist them as degradation or embrace them as vitality. Predictive English. When I look at how English keeps shifting, there's one area that feels particularly close to me because I live inside it every day. Predictive English. Not the kind that waits patiently for us to choose our words, but the kind that anticipates, edits, and nudges before I've even made up my mind. This is the English of autocorrect, predictive text, suggested replies, and yes, even my collaboration here, where AI helps me build these episodes. It's subtle, it's convenient, but it's also a quiet force shaping how we speak and write. Autocorrect, the silent gatekeeper. I can't count how many times I've been typing only for my phone to decide it knows better than me. We all laugh at the infamous typo problem, but underneath the humor is something real. Autocorrect is enforcing a rule about what counts as valid English. When I try to use slang, or when I slip in a bit of Italian, or when I deliberately spell something creatively, my device resists. It snaps me back to its standard. I can override it, of course, but the friction is there. And when the correction happens automatically, without me noticing, I sometimes end up sending words I never intended. That's when I realize autocorrect isn't just helping me, it's training me. Over time, I adapt to what my phone will accept. My fingers remember the correct pattern, even if my voice or my thoughts were reaching for something else. That is predictive English in action, language being steered, one tiny correction at a time. Predictive text, the default voice. It goes further. Start typing on most apps, and the next word is offered, already waiting. Sometimes it's useful, sometimes it's uncanny. Other times, I find myself choosing the suggestion just because it's there. That's the danger of defaults. They're invisible until you notice them. They save me time, but they also flatten my voice. Instead of crafting a sentence, I click sounds good or thanks for reaching out. It's polite, functional, but it's not me, and we most likely all do it. And the more I use these defaults, the more my language bends toward them. Predictive text doesn't just predict, it prescribes. It creates a center of gravity around average, common English, and slowly pulls me into it. I have to ask myself, if I keep choosing what's offered, what happens to the quirks, the edges that play in my language? Scenario, my dialogue with AI. The best way I can explain this is by reflecting on how this very podcast is created. I bring my direction, my experiences, my reflections, growing up in an Anglo-Italian family, learning languages, and watching the internet shape English in real time. I bring themes and boundaries and structure, but then I work with AI, and suddenly there are drafts, expansions, possibilities. The machine offers, and I decide. I contribute what I want to discuss, including my own knowledge and experiences. Sometimes I accept, sometimes I push back, sometimes I rewrite entirely. It's not that different from predictive text on a phone. The machine suggests I choose. But if I stop choosing, if I simply accept everything offered, my voice disappears into the averages of the dataset. That's what predictive English feels like on a personal scale. A collaboration with something that can accelerate me, but also flatten me if I stop paying attention. Convenience versus creativity. I understand why people accept defaults. They're convenient, they save time. They protect us from typos, from embarrassment, but they also train us into sameness. When my email client suggests "sounds good" as a reply, I know thousands of others are sending that same phrase. We start to lose variety. Our written English becomes predictable not because we chose it, but because the machine made it easy. This reminds me of how English has always flattened difference. The printing press standardized spelling. Schools enforced proper grammar. Now predictive systems enforce digital standards. Each wave erodes individuality in the name of efficiency. The global tilt, there's also the global dimension. Most predictive systems are trained on American English. That means my phone will insist on color instead of color, organize instead of organize. The machine is gently nudging the world toward American defaults. It's a linguistic empire through interface. No soldiers, no colonizers, just spell check. And over time, those nudges matter. They accumulate into cultural dominance, editing the machine. But I've also noticed something important. I can resist. Sometimes I deliberately type the long way around, ignoring the suggestion. Sometimes I put back my original spelling after autocorrect interferes. Sometimes I stretch a phrase awkwardly, just to avoid the flattening of a default. And in this podcast, I push back constantly. I keep steering the AI, reminding it what matters, to keep the narrative, to prioritize linguistics over philosophy, to integrate my stories and reflections. That's how I edit the machine instead of letting it edit me. And that feels crucial. Default versus divergence. Everything comes back to this tension. Default versus divergence. Defaults make things smooth, quick, and predictable. But too many defaults, and the language loses vitality. Divergence, breaking the pattern, resisting the suggestion, is where individuality lives. English itself has always existed in this tension. Standard English pulled dialects into conformity, but dialects pushed back. Slang, regional accents, creative writers, all divergences against the default. Predictive systems are simply the newest front in this old story. Activity. Default versus divergent. Catch predictive text shaping your voice and reclaim it. Time. 10 minutes plus awareness during the day 1. Open a new message. Type 3 everyday starters, e.g., thanks for. Quick update. Following up on. 2. Don't accept the suggested completions. Instead, write the sentence in your own cadence. 3. Send at least one real message today where you reject all suggestions and restore your phrasing. 4. After sending, check your body state, flatter or more alive. Philosophical pause. Who owns the words? Here's where philosophy creeps in, even if I keep it to a minimum. When I write with predictive systems, whether a phone keyboard or AI, whose words are they? Mine, because I chose. The machine's, because it suggested. Or both, because language now exists in collaboration. This doesn't scare me, but it does make me cautious. I don't want to wake up one day and realize my voice has been absorbed into a statistical average. The nervous system response, I also notice something bodily. When I send a suggested reply like, thanks for reaching out, my body feels flat. It's polite, but not alive. When I write something fresh, even clumsy, I feel the difference. That ties into the nervous system language work I've been exploring. Predictive text can't align tone, breath, or gesture with meaning. Only a conscious speaker can do that. Which means authenticity survives only when I resist the pull of the default. Reflection prompt. When was the last time your phone or computer changed your words? Did you notice? Did it change the meaning? How often do you accept suggestions without thinking? Are you writing or are you selecting? That's the real question predictive English poses. Activity. LL means what exactly? Aim. See how digital markers act like grammar. Time 15-20 minutes 1. Scroll your last 20 messages, any app. Highlight every tone marker, lol haha emojis, lowercase, etc. 2. Choose 3 examples and rewrite each message without the markers. 3. Ask what changed, warmth, softness, irony, urgency. 4. Now rewrite one of those lines with a different marker, e.g. smiling face to upside down smiling face or lol. Note the new effect. 5. For the next 24 hours, swap one habitual marker, e.g. lol, for another, e.g. Observe how people respond. Predictive English is not neutral. It saves time, yes, it smooths expression. It even opens possibilities when used consciously. But it also narrows, flattens, and homogenizes. I don't reject it outright. I use it every day. I rely on it. But I remind myself constantly, defaults are not destiny. When I resist, when I edit, when I reinsert my quirks and my rhythm, predictive systems become tools. When I surrender, they become silencers. So I live in this tension, convenience pulling one way, individuality the other. And that is the heart of predictive English. The fight to keep our words our own, even when the machine is speaking with us. Fractured Futures English has never been one thing. It has always been a patchwork tongue, stitched together from conquest, trade, and creativity. But in our time, something new is happening. English is not just spreading, it is splintering. The global tongue doesn't produce one English, but many. Singlish in Singapore, Hinglish in India, Chinglish in China, Svenglish in Sweden, Spanglish across the Americas. Each one is vibrant, inventive, alive, but each one also asks a question. What happens to truth when English itself fractures? The shattering of one English for centuries, there was a dream of a single standard English. The printing press, grammar books, the BBC, and the American classroom all tried to enforce one version. But online, on the streets, in homes, that dream is dissolving. English is mutating in real time, adapted to local rhythms, grafted onto native tongues. I've seen it myself. In my family, English and Italian would weave together seamlessly. One sentence would start in English, slip into Italian, and back again without pause. For me, it was music. To others, it sounded broken. But what is broken really? It worked. We understood. Later in Sweden, Svenglish, they apologized for their English, even though it was excellent. When they stumbled, they dropped a Swedish word into the gap, and I understood. The conversation didn't collapse. It adapted. That is fractured English, not failure, but flexibility. Truth as a fractured word, truth. On the surface, it seems solid, a simple word, one syllable. But the moment it enters fractured Englishes, it splinters. In political English, truth is a battlefield. One man's truth is another's propaganda. In scientific English, truth means evidence, peer review, and replication. In religious English, truth carries the weight of revelation and belief. In online English, truth might just mean my opinion, typed loudly. And then across cultures, the fractures deepen. In some Englishes, truth is blunt and direct. You say it as it is. In others, truth is softened, wrapped in politeness, hinted rather than declared. The same word, the same letters, carries wildly different nervous system responses depending on where and how it is spoken. That is the danger and the beauty of fractured English. Words lose singularity and gain multiplicity. Creoles of the digital age. If the old Creoles of the Caribbean and Africa were born of empire and trade, today's Creoles are born of the internet. Memes, slang, borrowed words, they spread instantly. A Nigerian teenager can mix pidgin with American slang on TikTok, and a week later, a kid in London is copying it. Spanglish flourishes not just in borderlands, but online communities. I remember the early internet chat rooms, where phrases like ASL, age, sex, location, became common currency. They weren't proper English, but they worked. Later, LOL stopped meaning laughing out loud and became a tone marker, softening sentences. That was fractured English too, new dialects born in digital space. But here's the catch. These new forms often make truth slippery. Irony dominates. Sarcasm is everywhere. Memes bend meaning until words say the opposite of what they used to. Truth becomes layered, playful, unstable. The Italian moment in Germany, one memory stays with me. I was working in Germany for 3 weeks. One day, I needed a receipt for food expenses. I tried in German, but there was no luck. I tried in English, but nothing. Then I overheard the staff speaking in a way that told me they had Italian roots, and it wasn't a random Italian restaurant run by Germans. It was a migrant family business. So I switched suddenly, mid-conversation, into Italian, and everything shifted. They smiled, understood, and not only gave me the receipt, but also improved the service. That moment taught me. Fractured language isn't a weakness. It's a bridge. The truth of my request hadn't changed, but the truth of how it was received shifted completely once I spoke in their fractured English-Italian world. Language opened a door where standard English had failed. Truth in the age of fractures, but fractured English is not always benevolent. In politics, fractured truths are weaponized. Truth becomes plural. Alternative facts, fake news, conspiracy, counter-narrative. Words fracture into camps, each claiming it is real. Even in activism, truth fractures. The word truth in climate activism carries moral urgency. The same word in denialist communities carries defiance. Each camp inhabits its own fractured English, where the same word signals opposite meanings. The nervous system feels this fracture. When someone says truth in my world, I feel resonance or tension depending on which English they inhabit. Singlish, Hinglish, Chinglish. The joy of hybrid Englishes spend time in Singapore, and you hear Singlish, English woven with Malay, Tamil, and Chinese. It's lively, compressed, rhythmic. Outsiders call it broken. Insiders call it theirs. In India, Hinglish thrives, Bollywood, advertising, and everyday speech all mix English with Hindi. It's a language of aspiration and humour, a fractured English that carries Indian truth. Chinglish in China bends grammar and imports idioms, sometimes clumsy, sometimes inventive. Long time no see was once Chinglish, now it's global English. Each fractured English resists the default. Each one protects local rhythm and worldview, and each one reminds me that truth is never universal. It's spoken in accents, idioms, and fractures. Reflection prompt. Which English feels most like home to you? Is it the standard you were taught at school? The slang of your friends? The hybrid English you switch into with family or colleagues? And when you hear someone speak fractured English, do you see an error or do you hear a possibility? Truth as spell and weapon in fractured futures, truth itself becomes a spell. Think of headlines during the pandemic. The truth about vaccines. On one site it meant reassurance. On another it meant exposure. Same phrase, opposite spells. This isn't just semantics. It's pragmatics, the use of truth to persuade, to divide, to comfort, to control. In fractured English, truth doesn't unite, it splinters. And we must learn to navigate the shards. Personal reflection, silence and fluency. For years, people told me I didn't speak much Italian. I was quiet, my vocabulary was limited, but I was listening, absorbing, waiting. Later, when fluency came, it flowed out naturally. Truth for me in that period was silence, and silence was part of fractured English too. It wasn't absence, it was preparation. Now with Swedish, I feel the same hesitation. I know the grammar. I could probably pass a high school test, but my tongue stumbles on vowels. I stay quiet, self-silenced. The truth is, fluency isn't just knowledge, it's confidence. And fractured English reveals those layers too. Truth in micro-English is online. English is splintering into micro-dialects. Gaming English, fanfiction English, Twitter English. Each has its own truth markers, its own codes. In gaming, GG means good game, but can also be sarcastic. In fanfiction, canon means official truth, while headcanon means personal truth. In Twitter English, truth is often performed through hashtags, che facts, che truthbomb, just saying. Each micro-English fractures truth again. Each one carries its own nervous system impact. Philosophical edge. Can truth survive? Here's the question I can't avoid. If English keeps fracturing, can truth survive? Or does truth itself fracture along with it? Perhaps truth has never been singular. Perhaps it has always been plural, contextual, and embodied. Fractured English doesn't destroy truth, it reveals its multiplicity. Activity. Truth in two Englishes. Feel how truth fractures across context. Time, 15-25 minutes 1. Write the sentence, the truth is, and finish it twice. A, as you would in a formal context, work, email, public. B, as you would with a close friend, DM voice note. 2, read both aloud. Note the lexicon, tone and stance changes. 3, now write a third version in a hybrid English you use. G, a sprinkle of another language, dialect, or online tone markers. 4, ask which version feels most honest in my body and why. Fractured English is not a failure. It is creativity, survival, and adaptation. But it also fractures truth. When I hear the word truth now, I don't imagine one meaning. I imagine many: political truth, scientific truth, religious truth, personal truth, each fractured by accent, culture, context. And so I ask myself, which truth am I living in? And which English am I speaking it in? Because fractured futures remind me, language is never one, it is always many. And truth, like English, is always spoken through fracture, the soul of English. When I sit with the question of English, after tracing its origins, its mutations, and its fractures, I find myself circling back to something deeper, almost spiritual. What is the soul of this language? What makes English English? Is it grammar? Vocabulary? The way it absorbs from other tongues? Or is it something more elusive? The way it has always carried power. Power as the anchor, because English has never been just a neutral tool. It has always been about power, the power to command, the power to colonize, the power to legislate, the power to connect across oceans, the power to silence, and the power to give voice. When I hear power, I don't hear a single meaning. I feel its weight in my body. Sometimes it brings tension, the domination of one over another. Other times it stirs inspiration, the ability to stand up, to speak, to act. That is English too, both the tongue of empire and the tongue of resistance, both the language of propaganda and the language of poetry. The empire's tongue English spread through ships and cannons before it spread through classrooms and keyboards. It carried the power of an empire. People were told they had to learn English to gain opportunities, to be educated, to participate in modernity. In India, in Africa, in the Caribbean, English was imposed as the language of power. It displaced local tongues, it silenced generations of indigenous voices. It became the language of courts, of contracts, of commerce. That legacy lingers. Even now, English holds disproportionate weight in science, technology, and global business. Power lives in the fact that you need English to publish research, to work in international firms, and to navigate airports. English became the default, not because it was better, but because power backed it. Personal power in language. But power in English is not just historical, it is personal. I remember how powerless I felt as a child when my Italian vocabulary was so limited. I stayed quiet, I absorbed, I listened, but I couldn't fully enter conversations. Later, when fluency came, I felt the opposite. I felt the rush of power, the ability to join in, to joke, to express, to shape how I was seen. The same thing happens now with Swedish. I know the grammar, but my tongue stumbles. My confidence falters, I stay silent. And in that silence, I feel the power imbalance. When someone else can speak fluently and I cannot, I feel smaller, less able. Language doesn't just describe power. It is power, felt in the body. Power as domination versus power as potential English has always carried both sides of power. On one side, domination. The power of standard English to shame those with accents. The power of grammar rules to exclude those who speak differently. The power of native speakers to mock or correct. On the other side, potential. The power of English to give voice to migrants who weave it with their own tongues. The power of hybrid Englishes like Singlish or Hinglish to express new cultural truths. The power of English to spread movements, to connect dissidents, to create solidarity across borders. That tension, domination versus potential, is the soul of English. Logos of English. Adaptability, theft, survival philosophically. Some traditions use the word logos to mean the principle of order, the word that shapes reality. If English has a logos, I believe it is adaptability. The soul of English is not purity but theft. It takes words from everywhere. French, Norse, Hindi, Swahili, Italian. It survives by absorbing. That is why English can be both the empire's tool and the rebel's weapon. It doesn't belong to one person. It mutates endlessly. Its soul is fluid, not fixed. Truth, power, and English today in fractured futures. Truth itself is contested. But what gives English its soul is the way it frames those contests in terms of power. Speaking truth to power. The power of words. Knowledge is power. These are English phrases that reveal how deeply language and power intertwine. Every slogan, every campaign, every hashtag is a tug of war over power. And English is the rope being pulled. Personal reflection. Power in silence and speech. When I was quiet in Italian, I wasn't powerless. I was preparing, I was building. But the shift into fluency felt like a shift into power, the ability to participate fully. Even now, when I stumble in Swedish, I remind myself, silence is not absence. Power lives in the listening too. But when speech comes, when I finally pronounce a word correctly, when I enter the flow, I feel the embodied power of language. It reminds me that English too carries both silence and speech, both domination and liberation, both empire and resistance. That duality is its soul. Reflection prompt. When you hear the word power in English, what rises in your body? Tension, resistance, inspiration? Notice not just the thought, but the sensation. Activity. Define your power. Think of one phrase of power you hear regularly. It could be a political slogan, a workplace mantra, or even something you tell yourself. Write it down. Then rewrite it in your own words, in a way that restores dignity, truth, or authenticity for you. Notice how the act of reclaiming shifts your sense of power. The soul of English is not purity. It is power. Power to dominate, but also power to resist. Power to silence, but also power to give voice. Power to flatten, but also power to diversify. English lives because it adapts. It steals, it mutates, it survives. Its soul is not fixed in grammar or vocabulary, but in the way it holds tension between domination and liberation, between empire and creativity, between silence and speech. And as I sit here, speaking into this project, I feel that same power. Not because English belongs to me, but because I choose how to use it. That is the soul of English. Adaptability, survival, and the power to shape reality, for better or for worse. The thread of English. As I draw this episode to a close, we've walked from the roots of English in conquest and collision, through its fractures across cultures, into the digital spaces where it mutates daily, and toward its very soul, the tension between power as domination and power as possibility. What stands out most is not a single definition of English, but its adaptability. English has always been a language in motion, never fixed. It bends, it borrows, it splits, it survives. And in that survival, it mirrors something about us. Humans are not fixed either. We adapt, we absorb, we fracture, and we reassemble. I often think back to my own journey with languages. The quiet years in Italian, when I didn't yet have the vocabulary to participate, the stumbling confidence with Swedish vowels, the laughter of Svenglish in a dentist's chair, the absurd but beautiful moment when Italian unexpectedly bridged the gap in a German restaurant. These are small stories, but they carry the larger truth. Language lives in the body, in the nervous system, in the space between silence and expression. And English, above all, shows this. It isn't owned by a single person. It isn't safeguarded by a single academy. It spreads because it bends. It thrives because it fractures. Its soul is survival, and that survival has always been about power, truth, power, and mutation. The anchor words we explored reveal the soul of English not in their dictionary meanings, but in their mutations. Each one splinters differently depending on who speaks it, where, and to whom. Safety, invoked to reassure but also to control. Justice, spoken differently by courts, protesters, and politicians. Truth, fractured across fractured Englishes, turned into spell and counterspell. Power is embodied both as domination and as empowerment. These words don't just describe the world, they shape it. And the way English mutates them tells us something deeper. Words are not stable. Meaning is alive. When I think of how English spreads online, memes, hashtags, acronyms, and emojis, I see a living grammar emerging. LOL no longer means laugh out loud. It signals tone, softens bluntness, and shows you're smiling even when you're not. That's not corruption. That's creativity. When I think of predictive text and AI, the default nudges that shape what we type, I feel both awe and caution. These systems make it easier to write, but they also narrow expression, pulling us toward what the machine thinks we mean. That is power too, subtle, silent, shaping us without us noticing. And when I think of fractured futures, Singlish, Hinglish, Chinglish, Svenglish, Spanglish, I don't see failure, I see vitality. Each fractured English carries its own truth. Each one resists the default, claiming its own power. At the heart of it all, English survives because it adapts. Its soul is not purity, but power. Power to spread, power to absorb, power to dominate, and power to liberate. I felt that in my own body, the silence of not knowing, the power of fluency returning, the vulnerability of stumbling, the joy of finding connection through Italian when English failed. The soul of English is not a fixed essence. It is a tension between empire and rebellion, domination and liberation, silence and speech. And that tension is what gives English its vitality. Activity. Archaeological linguistic dig think of 3 English words you use every day. They could be as ordinary as work, home, or love. 1. Write them down. 2. Look up their etymology, where they came from and what they once meant. 3. Then reflect. How has their meaning shifted in your own mouth, in your own life? Notice how knowing their history changes the way you feel when you say them. Language carries memory. Every word is an archaeological site. And when you dig, you often find bones you didn't expect. Arc 2 so far. We're only 2 episodes into this arc, AI and synthetic speech and the evolution of English, and already the ground has shifted. In episode 9, we asked whether synthetic speech carries the same weight as human speech. We explored AI's role in shaping not just what we say, but what it means to speak at all. Here in episode 10, we turned our gaze back to English itself, how it has evolved, fractured, and survived. Together, these episodes remind me that language is never static. Whether human or synthetic, spoken or written, fractured or standardized, language is always in motion. Arc 2 is about the future and philosophy of language, and we've only just begun, looking ahead, the ineffable. The next episode will take us into even stranger terrain, the ineffable. What about the things English cannot say? What about the feelings, experiences, and mysteries that slip through its net? Every language has gaps, places where meaning dissolves, where silence or gesture must take over. If English survives by absorbing and mutating, it also reveals its limits, and in those limits we find a new kind of truth. So as I close, I want to bring it all back to you. English is not just a language you use. It is a mirror of survival, of adaptation, of power. Every time you speak, you carry centuries of history in your mouth. Every time you write, you leave fingerprints on a living archive. Every time you choose a word, you wield power to harm, to heal, to silence, to awaken. The soul of English is survival. The soul of English is power. The soul of English is you, speaking it and listening to it now. Thanks for joining me for this episode of the Linguaverse. Until next time, stay curious, stay awake to your own language, and remember, every word carries its history within you. You've been listening to the Linguaverse, James Miller.